First of all, thank you all very much for joining. Really appreciate it. I think maybe to start, if we could just do kind of a round of introductions, I think it's probably helpful. And so, would love to understand your background, who are you, and give me something like exciting that you're working on. What's kind of a cool project that's like, really top of mind? I'll start with you, Mike.
Sure. So I'm Mike McCree. I'm the CIO of Melissa & Doug. It's good to see everyone. It's the first time I put a suit on in probably 3 years or so. I have a very varied and kind of lucky background. I started my career at Ingersoll Rand. Prior to that, did several startups. Then I moved into Land O'Lakes, where I was CIO there for 5 years in a 9-year career. After that, did a couple years at Subway, worked on their turnaround story. And then most recently joined Melissa & Doug, really because as most of us went through the pandemic, you start to revalue what you want to focus on, and I want to focus more on growth and innovation versus turnarounds. As far as exciting stuff I'm working on right now, I'd have to say that one of the biggest challenges that we're faced with in the retail toy industry is predicting what Santa Claus is going to deliver every season. No one seems to have this figured out. I thought even the big retailers would be a little further along, but the more I learn about that industry, they're not quite there yet either.
Isn't it marketing's job to make it what Santa Claus delivers? I feel like that's
if it was that easy, there'd be a lot less of them, right?
Fair. Monica, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Monica Kurana. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Dodge & Cox. We're in an asset management firm. Actually, I've been in asset management for over 22 years now. And have been in roles where tech transformation, tech innovation, digital has been a part of my playbook. And so innovation, as we know, is the centerpiece to all of that. What's exciting is, we're basically going through another modernization, transformation journey, leveraging some of the new technologies. And I think right now, technology itself is a very exciting space to be in. I think we're in a very good point almost a pivotal point from a perspective of tech innovations. As a CIO, CTO for over 15, 17 years, our goal has always been the same: business agility, scalability, business capability. And now we can actually deliver to those capabilities in a much easier, elegant, simplistic way. So it's just a very perfect time to be in this space.
You don't have to order a server to go do a project,
exactly.
Right? I mean, there's a lot of that agility. Please.
Neil Zane, I'm at Bank of America now. I was a technology salesperson in New York for a while, and I got pissed off because they were capping my commissions. So I went into real estate and then got terribly humbled, Anthony. Got punched in the face. So I went to a couple startups and then ended up at EMC. I got hired at Bank of America by someone that left EMC. And what we do is we're like a startup SWAT team. We're the bridge to the startup community. We introduce the startups to the bank, to the right people. We have no protocol, no bureaucracy. We can go everywhere we want to the Bank of America to make certain we introduce the most promising startups to the bank.
So I think that's actually a good segue. If I think about the attitude of various different organizations towards startups, I'd say for the most part, most organizations at least are willing to give lip service to the idea of we'd like to use them more, but not many have established programs that are designed systemically to actually incorporate them into the organization. What's your individual company's attitude towards startups, and kind of what's your process for adoption? Monica, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for us to be able to accomplish what we want, we have to have a mindset of always scanning and looking for companies that help us get an edge, help us deliver to the objectives I just mentioned. So for us, it matters less where the innovation's coming from, whether it's a startup or it's a much more mature company. I think definitely the thing that we see with startups is some of them are the journey, or where they are in the journey matters a lot, because there's a risk versus reward equation here, and that has to justify itself. So we are not the firm that will be the first adopter, but we like being in the early adopters. So I think there's a lot of openness, and we embrace actually startups very well. I don't know if you know, Dodge & Cox has been around since 1930.
I was going to say, it's a long time,
yeah.
So I have to imagine that risk calculus equation is rather difficult.
Actually, yes and no. So the fact that the firm has been so successful, having been around since 1930, still being privately owned, is because there is this openness to embrace change, openness to innovate, And basically from 1930 through now, just embracing all those different things and evolutions and journey that have happened. So it's built into the culture as well.
Okay, fair enough. Bank of America is huge. You
It's
obviously
huge,
have the innovation job.
You use the word process.
Yeah.
That's BS. It's common sense and courtesy. It's like, my thing is, let's just make certain I find out what my executive sponsor wants that the current vendors can't provide. Give me your list of requirements. Make certain that you have money, that there is a leader that wants this, that wants to spend their resources, devote their people to it, and I'll go find the startup that's going to match that. We have 4 people in California, and all they do is they meet with the VCs and the companies that they invest in. So I just match the right startup, and I'll go through 4 or 5 companies. The ones that can't fog a mirror, I get rid of them, make certain I just introduce the ones that really matter, that are ones I think can do it, to the executive sponsor. And the other thing is, I'll never introduce a company that has not already installed in production at a highly regulated, scaled out, complex, either financial institution or large enterprise, because otherwise you become a QA lab.
I think it's fair, but I also think that that risk calculus maybe screens out more innovation too. So like there's never a situation where you'd be
But
the
this
first.
is the thing. You could be the greatest company of all time, but if you've never been
It's about
and
your
scaled
executive
out,
sponsor.
we're going to work out all your kinks in the lab.
Okay, fair. Who are your executive sponsors?
So I cover global banking and global markets for the bank. We have people that cover different lines of business or subject matter experts like information security. So mine are the investment bankers and the tech teams that support the investment bankers, and then the markets, the traders, and the tech teams that support the traders.
So you got to play a little bit triangulation of making sure everyone's kind of in agreement, and you're the political the whip. You go whip the votes.
Have you ever done that with markets people?
I definitely have not. No.
It's much tougher than with the banking people, but yes, that's what we do.
Fair. Mike, what about you? I feel like Melissa and Doug might be a little bit less stodgy compared to financial services organizations that have been around for a while.
For sure, right? Size does matter here, and how much risk you're willing to take, and it also depends on really kind of what you're looking to solve. What problems are you looking to solve? Is it an area of your business where you're willing to take more risk to have that problem solved quickly, efficiently, or is it an area that's core to your company that you don't want to rock the boat? I've used numerous different methods. I've contracted with firms who go out and correlate startups, but the one I prefer the most is I prefer firms that can help me solve problems within my industry, because typically in your industry specific niches, the bigger firms that are enterprise specific or market specific aren't looking at those problems as focused as maybe a startup would be. And then from there, you take them through a process and you develop relationships with people like yourself, Anthony, East Coast, West Coast, Middle America, to try to develop at least a network that allows you to get insight into what's happening in those regions. Where do you see the trends going, and are these guys viable for a test or a pilot? But it does depend, kind of where you're willing to take that risk and where you're not.
And for your, let's call it executive sponsors, just to borrow the term from Neil, when you bring in a young company, obviously specific to your industry, you think it's a fantastic idea. Is there an attitude or a reticence that happens from the management side? Do you have to corral their leaders who are like, why don't we just use IBM? Or what's kind of the zeitgeist?
Well, I think that if you are taking tremendous risk with the business, there's absolutely that bias,
Sure.
right?
Your core systems you want to make sure
Yeah,
are,
we're not going to test a startup to do an ERP,
Right.
right, for instance, and
Right.
do my financial accounting and closing. But if it's helping to solve a problem that they're interested in, like, forecasting what Santa Claus is going to deliver, I'd say their risk tolerance is pretty high. Now, we may have different expectations on the startup, right? We may ask them to take on more risk. We might ask
Sure.
them, to prove to us that it can be done in payment upon completion, not payment upon milestones.
Sure.
So you can mitigate some of that risk as you go. But I think depending on the problem, I've had a lot of success in getting executive leadership on board, assuming that risk is contained.
I want to jump in there. So it's about people. So I don't care if the person is at the top of the chart and the major decision maker. If that person's been buying, let's say, Cisco for 30 years, I'm not introducing anything new to that person, right? Because it's about people. I need to get the right people in the right positions that want to get in harm's way.
So, but then you're literally, limited by the.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Not everybody. It's not a commodity, right? You got to go to the people that know that they have a history of bringing in new stuff, or you know that they will.
So, but doesn't that mean that that guy's just always going to buy Cisco for the rest of his life and like not really have a very fruitful career?
Absolutely. I stay away from them. It's a disease.
Look, I mean, the dinosaurs inevitably end up dying out, right? This is all about evolution. I mean,
But I don't have to waste my time.
No,
doing
you
that
shouldn't
also.
waste your time on that. I agree.
Yeah, I was going to say that, yes, you may still be staying with Cisco, but then there's a question about capabilities. You're looking for a niche or a certain problem that burdens the firm and solving for that. So when you look out, it's not that you're challenging the Cisco, you're trying to find ways to plug the holes that exist. And there are more technologies available now to fix those holes in a more elegant way. So that's typically the driver. And you're right, people will not change. However, if you can plug those holes, they care less as long as they still have the Ciscos.
I think that's fair, but let me maybe throw out two other ideas around that. One, there are hiccups, right? Even Cisco has hiccups. They have problems. Even IBM has hiccups, right? But I think when you have a startup that has a hiccup for whatever reason, you get Neil, waving the white flag, saying, "Oh, it's QA. We're not doing your QA for you." But is there some other kind of a cultural adjustment that happens when you say, "Look, we have to be patient. There are going to be some mistakes, but we're covered on the downside if it doesn't perform." Is that type of adoption a way that you kind of sell to the other side of the organization? Is that?
That's the thing. You have to undersell it. It's not going to be the greatest thing. It's going to do everything. Listen, there's going to be some problems here, and I always find out the problems from the CEO. Hey, you've been on a journey. There are things that are going wrong. There's a proof of concept. There's things that have gone wrong. What have you learned? And I'll make certain that the management teams at Bank of America know that, so they're prepared. It's all about preparation, right? Managing expectations up front.
Don't you guys wish you had like an internal sales person for this? I feel like it's a
I
great
mean, that
idea.
definitely would help. But I mean, to both their points, it's about a pull strategy, not a push, right? Pushing a startup up is usually not gonna work in most organizations. But if you're listening to their needs and you're pulling from that and you're correlating a solution, like any big project we do, if it becomes their solution to their problem, you're gonna have a lot more success with startups or big companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always kind of a persuasion conversation of some sort, right? We're all accountable in some fashion to somebody else, and even if you're at the top of the organization and you say, we must go do this thing, there are a lot of people who can sabotage it along the way, right? And so you need that consensus building, and I think, to your point, it's really a little bit of that undersell so that, when somebody goes, holy crap, it does that? That's amazing.
Yeah, that's funny about that. There was a company called Delphix, database virtualization. Bonded with the CEO, knew the product worked. There was an Oracle bigot. Stopped us every step of the way. Stopped everybody at JP. Soon as he leaves JP, Delphix gets the Innovation Award. Soon as he left Bank of America, poof, we got it in, and it's been a huge win at Bank of America.
Who is this guy and how do I make sure?
I don't know.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about tangible examples. So, and I think maybe that's a good segue as well. Delphix being obviously in an innovation category and now I think much bigger as a company probably than back then. What's a good example, and maybe Mike, if you want to talk a little bit about how to figure out what Santa Claus is delivering. What innovation are you looking at? And you don't have to name companies, maybe more just tangible. What is the type of innovation, and what have you been able to bring in? And if not that, maybe some other topic.
Yeah, I'll position in a place where I've had a little bit more success in the ag tech, sector. I was very lucky during that time period, quite a few years ago now, where ag tech was just coming to the farm. All this cloud innovation happened, all this mobile innovation happened.
This is Land O'Lakes?
It's at my time at Land O'Lakes. And none of it had entered the American farm. And so we were there working with our farmers who own Land O'Lakes, and we helped introduce them to over 40 different startups, because at that point, no one knew what the ag tech word meant, no one knew what was going to win, no one knew what the trends were going to be set. And so we ended up, working with the farmers on what are their problems, what are the things we need to go after, and then who are all these tech startups out there. We started categorizing them, kind of creating almost like a Crunchbase. One of the partners here today was telling me about that they do that for some Israeli startups, and over time they start to filter themselves out. So if you want to talk about specific problems, we were talking about field monitoring. We had to solve this problem. Figuring out what a field's doing every year. And how well it's developing is a hard problem when you have really big fields. And so there were lots of solutions in the market, but none of them that could hit the price point that we wanted. And so we eventually found a startup out of France who could do it with secondary market satellite imagery. And they could take the price from basically $500 an acre down to about 2 to 3 cents an acre. And that was the dramatic, breakthrough that we had in farming, was that now, and it's now pretty much an industry standard, that you monitor your fields through satellite imagery. But at the time, we needed to correlate and nurture all these relationships to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? Some people had sensors, some people had mesh networks, some people had automated tractors, some people had drones. We tested all of them until we found that the secondary market for satellite imagery was the real breakthrough.
Cool.
So that's just one example.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Monica?
Yeah, for us it would be, I think we're always looking for data insights. So it's about buying alternative data sets, and there are a lot of companies that do a lot of NLP on that space as well, looking at signals that they may be developing, consulting firms that help you with building your models as well. So I think for us, that's where the biggest innovation is.
In the ML, AI, NLP,
ML, AI,
computer vision, all
NLP.
that stuff. That's
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's a great innovation area, and I think there's a lot that still has to be learned there. It seems like there's new progress every day in various different tools. And to your earlier point about the agility around it, I think if you look back even 2 years ago, some of the tools that were just natively available were not as strong, right? And now there's all kinds of people who don't even have to know things about machine learning to go out and build no-code models and all that stuff, but still early. Neil, what are you tracking? What's your...
Yeah,
what's
so
your-
I'm working on this cool thing right now.
Is it real estate? Are you going to go back into real estate? No.
Prop tech is big, but I'm not getting involved. No, so there's the head of global and investment banking, and he's also in charge of business banking and commercial banking technology. Right now, we don't have a 360-degree view. We have all this BS legacy data pools. So we're going to bring in either Snowflake or Databricks, which is a big deal for Bank of America because we're not in the cloud yet or anything. And the whole thing is to cross-sell, because we don't have this 360-degree. So each of our clients have 2 products. We want them to have 8 products. So I'm taking, this is about the socialization, right? So I'm taking this exec, and I'm going to every one of my contacts, the head of information security, the head of the cloud initiative that we just hired from American Express, making certain that it's socialized to all the right people, so when it comes down the line, nobody's surprised.
We should talk.
Oh, you got something?
I always got something.
Yeah, you always got
I always
something.
got
Something in his pocket.
Give me a call.
So I think we have a few more minutes. Let's maybe ask for advice. What advice would you give startups that want to pitch Bank of America, startups that want to pitch Dodge & Cox, startups that want to pitch Melissa & Doug? What's the appropriate way, or what's really what advice would you give? I'll leave it open-ended to that. Monica?
Yeah, I think, as you earlier said, we are looking at startups all the time. The startups are not always going to be a perfect match. It's an 80-20 rule. So we look for those startups that we think will help us a lot and work through the 20% of the gap. So I think the key thing is being upfront about what the product does and what it doesn't. And our relationship is one of trust. So the more trust we have, the more we are willing to wait and kind of work with the vendor to figure out, okay, this is the timeline in which we should expect this to work. So openness, candor, building trust, and more importantly, delivering.
Yeah.
So we typically, our approaches, we'll do a pilot, see it works, work with the vendor in the timeline, and then roll it out. The second piece is, we have this thing, we look a lot at technology and think about fitting technology in the old way, meaning the old processes, old mindsets. So we also like partners that tell us, challenge us a bit to maximize the value of the products they're bringing, which may require a change in our processes, which may require a change in our mindset. So that holistic change is important, and we just like those vendors who kind of help us maximize the value of the products that they're really offering.
So transparency, especially for things that may not be working, just to make it very clear so that there's not any confusion. And then also really at the value level, make sure that there's an understanding of how to help drive that paradigm shift.
Yes.
Neil?
So my thing is, make certain it's a freaking dialogue, not a PowerPoint presentation. Because I tell the CEO, hey,
Show up and
I give
throw
you,
up?
yeah, I give you 30 minutes. That doesn't mean you talk for 25. Because you know what? Did you learn anything? No, because you were talking the whole time. So that's number one. And number two is, I always make sure, like the WeWork documentaries and the Uber, like those ego maniacs that sprinkle fairy dust. That does not happen when I meet with the CEO. I'm like, listen, this is what's going to happen. You're going to tell me the information I want to hear. And then after that, you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. And that's like, what problem do you solve? Where have you done it? Take me through a use case. How many employees? How do you support it? There's very specific things I ask for, and then we can go into the fairy dust thing.
Fair enough.
I would say, remember that it's always based on relationships. So you have to develop and nurture the relationships with the executives that you're interacting with. And then you have to rapidly figure out, what category are they in? Are they willing to push it for you on your behalf? Are they very interested, but timing might be off? Because in a lot of cases, there's definitely startups I'm interested in interacting with, but my priorities just don't align. And it might be a year from now or 2 years from now. Or is it right for the company and the right timing to where you can really rally around it? The second piece of that is be willing to take on an enormous amount of risk if you're going for a big brand or a big company as a startup, because that's what we're going to expect. We want to see it through. You will get your value out of the relationship in that contract eventually, but you got to be willing to prove that it works and not just put it on a PowerPoint.
I think the hardest thing I find is timing is always the challenge, right? I think most of the time, and at least especially if you've done some level of curation, some level of understanding to say, okay, yes, I find there's a need, there's a fit, here's the value, here's how many employees the company has. Those types of things are all kind of at the outset, but the timing is always hard, right? And I think, nobody wants to be a pest to email you every week and say, is the timing right, is the timing right? But I also find that, especially today, post-pandemic, a lot of executives don't know what that project timeline actually will be. And so this will be great, call me in Q4. And so then, the conversation in Q4 is, oh, we did that project last year, sorry, So it's like this weird kind of how do you get that timing appropriately right? Do you have any guidance in terms of, I'll call it avoiding pestering, but being pleasantly persistent?
One is just an email brief reminder. Hey, Mike, how's it going? You told me to check in a few quarters from now. I'm checking in. That soft touch to make sure that it's warm. The other piece, though, is that even if I don't know who you are, you still need to make sure your web presence is strong on SEO, because I've found just as many startups by starting a Google search myself. I have this problem. I need it solved. None of my big partners can do it. Where do I go first? The world goes first to Google. After that, I call Anthony, I call 15 other people. I'm like, do you know anybody who can do this? But being present in both ways is more important than that hard push.
I think that makes sense. Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate the sage wisdom. Thank you, everyone.